And you can imagine what I'm up against, right? Because people don't necessarily want to do this. So what I do is I actually ask people to go home and just try to do anything creative. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be cooking, it could be gardening. And so if you take a look at the graph up in the right-hand corner, I've always been fascinated by these graphs. They're called learning curves. And if you look at it, it says trials underneath, and so that's the number of times you try something new. So say you try to write a poem the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time. Does everybody understand what that? And then success, at the bottom, it's you're not so good, and at the top, you get better. So when somebody tries to do something for the very first time, tell me, what is it going to turn out to be like for them? What does this graph say? Failure. That's really interesting that people say failure. It's actually not failure, it's just not very good. You know, and that's what happens is we have that stigma of failing, but the truth is it's you're just learning to do something new, so of course you're not going to be good at it at first. It's just natural learning. Do you remember when you learned to walk? No, you don't, but when you learned to walk, I can bet you that when you fell down, you didn't just stay on the floor and go, oh, I'm not good at this, I'm never going to get it. You know how come I know that? Because you're all here today. So, my job is to get people to try to do something creative in the first place. And then when they do it and they feel like crap about themselves, I show them this graph, and what does this graph tell them they should do? Tell me. Keep trying, because what happens if you keep trying? You get better. No matter what, you will get better. So once I had a student, her name's Belina, and she tried to go home and do a watercolor. And she came back the next week with a little tiny piece of paper that she'd folded up several times. It was about this big, and she was not proud of this at all. And I asked her, oh, you know, this is a safe environment. Will you just share with us? And so she, you know, very slowly opened it up, and it was a picture of a house and a sun and grass and a blue sky. And she said, it looks awful. It looks awful. It's like the grass looks like, you know, just, they're just lines, and the sun just looks like a blob. It looks like an 8-year-old did it. And I said, well, Belina, when was the last time you tried watercoloring? And she's like, when I was 8. So she stopped. So I got her to keep doing it, and she got better. So how many of you believe me that if you get better, if you keep trying, you'll get better at something? Okay, that's about half the room. How many of you are more willing to experiment than you were 5 minutes ago with something? Okay, that's like, oh, 15%. All right, we're getting there. All right, if you look at the graph beneath the graph above, that's what it looks like when you blow it up and you look at the details. So it's not really smooth. It's not like you just get better and better and better. So what happens sometimes? You can have a bad day. You can write a good poem, a good poem, a good poem, a good poem, and then all of a sudden write a crappy poem. And what do you think people tend to do when that happens? They give up. What would you tell them to do? Keep going, because they're going to get better, right? Do you believe me? Okay. All right. Good. Good, 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 good. People are afraid to make mistakes. That's why they don't want to experiment. But sometimes, when you make a mistake, it turns out to be a winner. How many of you are familiar with these products? 2 people know Coca-Cola. And I see almost everybody here is drinking a Coke. Okay. Does anybody know the stories behind any of these products? Do you care to share?
Post-it notes, they just had an adhesive that didn't work very well.
There was a researcher at 3M Research who was trying to make a really strong glue. And he failed because his glue was not very strong, it was very weak. And in fact, last time I gave a talk, there was somebody in the audience who had worked at 3M Research who knew this guy who was on the committee that killed his idea. Yeah, he felt really bad about it. He still does to this day. So what happened is he had a friend that also worked at 3M Research who sang in a choir. And about 4 years later, he was singing one day, and his notes kept falling out of his hymnal. And he was thinking, you know, that my friend who came up with that weak glue, that could really come in handy right now, because I could, you know, keep the marker there and it wouldn't fall out of my book. Guess what happened? How many people here, I would really like to see you respond to this. How many of you have ever used a Post-it note? Okay, case closed. It's okay to make mistakes. Anybody, pick another one. I'm not going to probably go through all of these, but you want another? Yeah.
Chocolate chip cookies were going to be chocolate cookies. The person put in chunks of chocolate and it didn't dissolve, so he baked them. We got chocolate chip cookies.
That's exactly right. It was a Ruth Wakefield. I know, very good. She owned a bed and breakfast called Toll House Bed and Breakfast, which is interesting, right? And she was famous for her chocolate cookies. And she would use baker's chocolate, but one day she didn't have any. And all she had was a Nestle's bar. And she said, oh well, I'll just give it a shot, because everybody's waiting for my famous cookies. So she broke it up, put it in the dough, and guess what? She failed. They didn't melt all the way. She made a deal with Nestle's. Next time you buy some chocolate chips, look at the back and you'll see her recipe on the back. She's a very rich woman now. So is it okay to make mistakes sometimes? Sometimes. That's okay. That's okay. The barometer can vary. I'm happy for the barometer.